Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning in Calgary, Alberta. This is one child abuse survivor to another. It's Friday morning, January the 14th. I keep saying July for some reason, probably wishful thinking, because it's cold and snowy out there, so that's why I have July on the brain. I'm drinking coffee, just waking up here. I'm glad to be here. We'll be on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and chat room is open. I did pop the link into there to what I wanted to continue talking about here this morning. That's from mentalhelp.net, www.mentalhelp.net. And it's an article from Catherine Pacicelli called Why Do Adults Stay in Abusive Relationships? And this particular article is quite interesting to me to look at because I've known so many people who have been involved in domestic violence and abuse situations and stayed in it, and my mom was a perfect example. So this stuff, I understand this stuff as a sort of a looking at it secondhand, right? And so it's good information. There's all kinds of info on this website regarding child abuse, domestic violence, and just tons and tons of articles. So if you go to this website, www.mentalhelp.net, you can see that all kinds of therapists, counselors, and psychotherapists and whatnot have posted articles on here, and there's some really good information here. So that's what we're going to continue looking at here this morning. I'm not a counselor or therapist. I say this on every show just in case somebody catches this show for the first time. And, I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own blog talk shows, and I just want it to be one more voice, really, talking about the issues that surround abuse, speaking out against abuse, and also just for survivors. There's so many of us survivors, and I thought, hey, I don't mind talking about this stuff and, sort of encouraging people to, to hold on and to, that there is help, there is hope, right? I know because I've been on the other side of that where I didn't think there was any hope, I didn't think there was any help or hope. And so I know what it's like to be on the other side of that. 4 years ago, a little bit over 4 years ago, I was functioning quite well. I was able to hold a job down, no problem, and was able to have friends and have fun and stuff. But my whole life was affected, so badly by the abuse that I suffered as a child that I used to plan my suicides. And I'm really glad that I didn't go through with them. My parents taught us how to kill ourselves, and just growing up in the home that I grew up in, suicide was an option, and suicide was something that both my parents were always either talking about or attempting or, discussing. It was something that we grew up hearing as children, all of myself and my 6 siblings, and so there was 7 of us children, right? And we all considered it an option because our parents made it an option for us, and so I know what it's like to be sitting on the other side of that. And that's why I'm doing these shows, in the morning, because I really wanted to be able to reach out to people and say, look, it doesn't have to, we don't have to have this horrible life just because our parents abused us or somebody got a hold of us and abused us. We can learn to move on and heal, you know what I mean? But in order to do that, we have to do some work. So whether you go see a counselor, whether you go see a therapist, or if you reach out to someone who can help you kind of work through things, if they're trustworthy and you trust them, group support, online group support for adult survivors of child abuse. There's all kinds of different things out there for people who may want to begin their healing journey, right? So that's why I'm doing these shows. And so you have to listen at your own discretion, really. Topics like this can really trigger people who are survivors of child abuse. So you want to be careful when you're listening to shows like this, like mine or any other show like this, talking about abuse, because it can trigger you. And you have to know what's good for you to listen to. Ultimately, you are in charge of what you listen to. And if you choose to listen, you're listening at your own discretion to all of my shows. Everyone has to listen to at your own discretion to all of my shows. So I appreciate everybody being here. And young people under the age of 18, anyone under 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my shows because I believe in protecting children at all times. We all do. I'm a director. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and that's what we do at Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. We're working to promote awareness and education to help save children's lives, right? So it's so important that you, as a young person under the age of 18, get the information, learn how to keep yourself safe online. And my shows have a lot of adult content on them, and I think the young people should have permission to listen to the show, right? Anyone under the age of 18. So have someone listen to the show with you who's older who can help you make the decision whether you should be listening or not, right? Be doing yourself a favor and myself as well. So thanks, everybody, for being here. We're going to continue on with this article from Catherine Patricelli, and why adults stay in abusive relationships. And we've been looking at this for a couple of days now, and she was saying that there's many reasons why adults might stay in an abusive relationship, and sometimes it's just that they're economically dependent on the abuser. Sometimes they feel that they just don't have a choice. Sometimes it's because they think that abuse is normal. If people grew up abused, that was my parents. They grew up in abusive homes, and their parents not show them any coping skills or show them how to properly treat other people, or how to or that life could be good, right? My parents were born in the 1920s, and they were brought up in the 1930s, the Great Depression and the dirty 30s. My parents were born and brought up in one of the worst times in history, and people did not have much patience for children at that time. And there was some of the old attitudes from the 1800s where children should be seen but not heard, and also that children were just kind of like workhorses. They were kind of looked at differently than children are today. They were looked at as, whether they were considered part of the family or whatever, they were really looked at as like farmhands or kids, that would, back in those days, were just expected to toe the line, and they really didn't have much room to be kids, And so, especially where my parents grew up, which was the middle of the sticks in Nova Scotia in the 1920s, which would have been extremely backward. Those people were all born, my grandparents were born in the 1800s. Most people's great-great-grandparents were born in the 1800s. My grandparents were born in the 1800s. So it just tells you there was not a whole lot of education. There was not a whole lot of good stuff in there, right? And so people, my parents' families were all quite distorted in their thinking and very abusive. And so my parents were abused as children, and they just thought that's the way life was, and they continued that right into their own marriage, and continued that, treating their children the way that they were treated, which is the cycle of abuse, right? So many times people will stay in abusive relationships because they're so used to that cycle of abuse. That's what they think life is all about. I knew people growing up, friends of mine who got into abusive relationships, and that's really what they thought because they were abused as children too. It's been two good friends of mine. One ended up getting out from the abusive relationship after having a child with this man who was completely abusive and nearly killed her on several occasions, and pretty scary. She got away from him, which is great. Another friend of ours didn't get away and was killed by her partner in a domestic violence assault. So I've seen this even with younger generations, right? Not just older generations. So people sometimes do that. They get into these relationships and they think that's life. Life is brutal. Life is violent. Life is horrible, and that's what they think life is about violence and abuse, right? And so it's sad, true enough, because some of us don't think like that. I know I didn't. I knew it was completely wrong what my parents were doing. I knew that that wasn't what life should be about, because I just look around at some other people's lives and think, look at their lives. These other families that I knew, they weren't hurting each other. They weren't hurting their children. And it kind of looked like something out of some TV show, some old-fashioned TV show. I thought, man, look at the way these guys live compared to my home. I really used to make comparisons to my friends' homes compared to my home. And I'd be like, wow, look at the way these guys live. Like, this is so good. Like, nobody's torturing anybody. Nobody's hurting anybody. Nobody's threatening to kill their children. They love their children. The children love their parents. I thought, this is the way life should be. So I started making these real comparisons between my home and what I was experiencing in my home and what I was seeing in other people's homes, and I knew that what my parents were doing was wrong, So I didn't fall for that, whole cycle of abuse thing and get involved in abusive relationships. I sort of had a bit of an abusive relationship with this man who I was going out with for a few years when I was quite in my early 20s. But we broke it off because we were both of us had been abused as children. He had too, and we hadn't dealt with anything, and we were just going to turn out to be like our parents, and so he broke it off, which was smart. So we would have killed each other for sure. And that was the only time. Then after that, I made very clear boundaries. I made very clear choices, and I said, I will not allow somebody to abuse me as an adult. Right? I couldn't help what happened to me as a child, but I certainly do have that control in my life that I don't have to put up or tolerate abuse from anybody in my adult life, right? And so I set very clear boundaries, and I still stick to those boundaries. And so, that's probably one of the best things I've ever done for myself. as far as not allowing people to, not allowing myself to get involved in people who are abusive or get involved with abusive people in a relationship, right? I've been able to completely not have that happen, which is wonderful because, it's great. I'm in a relationship with a guy who, for 15 years, or almost 16 now, has treated me decently with respect and as a partnership instead of, like being abusive. So, he's a good man, and we started out a little bit rocky, but we figured it out, and you can actually check that out in my book if you want to. I wrote a book, A Life of Death and Redemption, and I did detail that in there because it was very important to me to show people that, sometimes we do begin to do these things, these repetitive sort of behaviors that our parents show us how to do as, growing up in these dysfunctional, abusive homes. I actually did take that into my relationships. But this man was not abused as a child, and he really didn't want to tolerate my abusive behavior, and I kind of didn't trust him. And everybody, when I was in my 30s, even not anywhere close to my healing journey, and I didn't trust anybody, you know what I mean? So I couldn't trust him, and he was wondering why I was behaving so badly. He knew I had been abused as a child, but he didn't realize the depth and the scope of the damage that was done. And when we broke off, I broke off for a year, and I went and did a whole lot of thinking and a whole lot of work on myself, and really spent that year by myself and just working and concentrating on getting through some of my feelings and doing some work on myself. And we got back together, and I explained to him what happened, and I told him, I said, look, I can't, if we're going to treat each other badly, what's the point in staying together, right? So I said, you need to understand that, like I have grown up in one of the worst situations a person could grow up in, and that's just hell. So, my behaviors are definitely need to be worked on. I said, but, I'm going to definitely try. I said, so you now have to respect that and be careful what you do around me so that I can learn to trust you. You know what I mean? And be careful how you treat me because I need to know that you're not going to abuse me, right? And so we sat down and we talked it out, and we ended up getting back together, and we've been together now for nearly 16 years. And he's terminally ill, and we don't live together, and he was diagnosed terminally ill 11 years ago, which is very sad. And so he's been extremely sick, especially this last 6 or 7 years. The first few weren't too bad. He started to kind of go downhill right away, and he's been on a, he's sort of up and down all the time. Like he has 6 months of where he's feeling not too bad, then he has 6 months where he's crashing. His body's just giving up. He's not end stage yet, but he's very close to end stage, poor guy. And so, but he's a good man, and he's treated me with respect and with dignity, and that's what I set for myself. And I said, look, that's the boundaries. I'm not going to be in a relationship where I'm not treated with respect and decency, right? And so we have to make those very clear choices for ourselves. We really do. It is our responsibility as adults to set those boundaries and make sure that people the people that we're going to have in our life are not going to abuse us, right? Because as children, we just really don't have a choice there. We just have to take what comes as children. I couldn't, get my parents to stop abusing each other. I couldn't get my parents to stop abusing me or my siblings, But as an adult, I definitely have that option. I have that choice, right? So that's the whole issue. We need to make sure that we take care of ourselves and have a good relationship, right? So she says that, that it's, the victims are motivated to generate excuses for their abuser because they'll say to think of each abuse episode as a one-time thing, even when it isn't, right? And that people will focus on the good aspects of the relationship, particularly those positive things that during the guilt latency phase of the abuse cycle, they'll convince themselves that the relationship is really a good one and that everyone has some problems in a relationship, right? People who have been in these abusive relationships might think, well, my partner, he didn't mean to do that or she didn't mean to do that, and now they've bought me some flowers and they've told me that they won't do that again and that they love me, right? So they'll look at all the positive stuff in the relationship, almost as a way to say, but there is some good stuff here, even though they know that their partner is hurting them, they know that their partner is abusing them. They will focus on the good stuff in order to stay in the relationship. You know what I mean? And they'll convince themselves that the relationship is really a good one, a good relationship, right? And they'll say things like, my partner just occasionally loses his or her temper when they're stressed out at work, or for those with poor self-esteem, the rationalizations may be thoughts such as, I don't deserve any better, or this is the best relationship I've ever had in my life. I've actually heard people say this. I know people who have been in domestic violence and abuse situations, and just recently, I won't name names, but they almost feel like they deserve it. Like it's their fault, or if they were just a certain way, then the abuse wouldn't happen, or that this really was the best relationship that they've ever been in, even though it's abusive. And I mean, it's horrible. People feeling that it's their fault. Abuse is never your fault, because the abuser is doing what they're doing because they want to, because they're choosing to. So how can it be anybody's fault when somebody abuses you? You know what I mean? Abuse is wrong in every way, right? Just so everybody knows, abuse is incredibly wrong. It's also against the law. And, you have rights. And you don't, if somebody's not treating you well, it's not because of anything that you're doing. It's just because they're trying to make you feel like it's something that you're doing, or because you're a certain way, or because we're behaving a certain way. That's a lot of times parents will use that as an excuse and say, well, if you weren't behaving this way, I wouldn't have to hurt you, and, that sort of stuff, right? My mom would always say, you're making me do this. You're causing me to do this to you. You're doing this to yourself, she would say. You know what I mean? Not all the time, but one particular episode, she actually did tell me that to my face, and I couldn't believe it. As I was like, well, I certainly didn't pick myself and throw myself into the oven and put my hands there and burn my knee and my hands. I certainly didn't throw myself into the oven. That was a choice my mom made to do because she wanted to hurt me, and she was attempting to hurt me every chance she got. And so, it's that like as if I had done that to myself. She was trying to pass the blame off to make me feel guilty, see, when she was the one that did that, you know what I mean? So that's the thing. Abusers will do that. Try to manipulate the victim, whoever their partner or children, to make them think that, hey, they deserve that treatment. If they were better people or better children, that wouldn't happen to them. And that's just not the case. People don't, abusers are doing what they do because they want to. It's a choice they're making to control the situation or to get their needs met or whatever the situation may be. Abusers are always in control, and they are always choosing which manner of control they're going to use, whether it's physical abuse, a punch is, if they're going to beat you or they're going to punch you or they're going to sexually use you, that's their choice. They're doing it to control you or to get their needs met, right? One or the other. And so abuse is never a child's fault, right? And abuse is never really a victim's fault. The partner or whoever is being abused, it's not their fault. The abusers don't have to do what they're doing. So, people that say stuff like, well, I don't deserve any better and whatnot, it's just because they've been so beaten down, They've been so beaten down and so psychologically misused and abused that they actually believe this garbage that their abusers would tell them, or believe that they must be so bad, so that's what children sometimes think. I must be so bad if my parents have to treat me this way, then what kind of a child am I, right? And they grow up feeling kind of like, wow, I must be just a horrible child, ignorant and horrible, and that's why I have to be beaten and tortured, right? And that's, my parents made us all feel like, all of my siblings and myself feel that it was our fault the way they had to treat us the way they did because we were such horrible, rotten children, right? They never gathered us in the room and said, oh, we just love our children. We were never actually told that, growing up. Our parents did not tell us anything nice. It was mostly like, I'm going to kill you. If you don't take that look off your face, I'm going to beat you into tomorrow, this kind of stuff. I should have killed you years ago. That's what we got from our parents, right? Not oh, I love you, son, I love you, daughter, or I love you, children, or anything like that. There was none of that stuff, right? And so we just grew up thinking that we were these horrible children, and we were horrible, you know what I mean? And that's a really bad thing to do to your children, and really bad thing to do to anybody, right? So don't buy into what those abusers are saying, right? If somebody's abusing you, you better get some help and realize that what they're doing is incredibly wrong, and that you don't deserve that. Nobody does. Nobody could. And so it's very important for you to realize it's not your fault. And that's why people say that stuff. It's not your fault. It wasn't my fault that my parents chose to hurt me. It wasn't my fault that my brother chose to sexually use me, right? And that's a fact, right? I mean, it's not our fault when people abuse us, but we do need to, as children, there's not much you can do unless somebody will step in. But when you're an adult, it is your responsibility to make sure that you have someone treating you properly in your relationship, whoever it is, your partner, your husband, your wife, that they would treat you with respect and dignity, and if they don't, it's because they don't want to. And it has nothing to do with you. It's because they have problems and they don't want to. So that's a huge issue, right? She says here, Catherine Petricelli says, victims may have any number of low self-esteem type beliefs that also keep them paralyzed and willing to accept something that is merely good enough. They may believe that they will be alone forever if they go out on their own. They may believe that they are so damaged that they would only pick another abusive partner anyway, so why not stay with this one? They may believe that they don't deserve any better than to be beaten or raped on a semi-regular basis. And abusers may reinforce this lack of self-worth by saying that abuse is normal and that they are overreacting, etc. And that's true because a lot of times abusers will just say, you're overreacting, I never did that, right? They'll deny it, right? Now that's a fact. Abusers quite often will manipulate the situation, or because they're so mentally ill, they just can't take responsibility for it because they're so mentally ill that they just refuse to take responsibility for it, which is my dad's case, you know what I mean? Because my dad is mentally ill and he could never really understand how much he hurt his family, right? Because half the time he was not in his right mind when he was doing these things. And people would say, well, how could that be? Well, because he's paranoid schizophrenic as well as other things in there, probably manic depressive as well. So he's bipolar, paranoid schizophrenic, and as well probably some borderline personality disorders. The man is sick, right? And so he didn't know what he was doing half the time to his children. That's a fact. My mom, now let me tell you, just on a regular basis, my dad would be attacking my mom. And one time in particular, she smashed him in the head with a ceramic lamp, this heavy, heavy lamp, and bashed his head with it, right? And I mean, it would have knocked anybody out. It would have knocked any regular, normal person out, right? Well, there's my dad. My dad just kept coming and coming and coming. It's like I grew up believing that my dad was like the devil because you could not get him to stop doing whatever he was doing because he's mentally ill. He's incredibly sick. And so when he was violent and he was on a rampage, your life was in danger, guaranteed, because he had no ability to stop himself because he's mentally ill, right? And so, I mean, the slight of killing him, you know what I mean? He reminded me of The Shining, that movie, The Shining. And there's movies when I don't have to watch horror movies because my childhood was exactly like a horror movie, and that's the whole issue. I don't particularly appreciate watching. I know other people get off on horror movies, but horror movies to me is just a replay of my childhood, right? So I actually don't watch them because it's so triggering to me because I see these people doing these crazy things, and I'm like, yeah, I know all about that. You know what I mean? So it's like it's just like watching my life story. It's our life was a horror story. It was just like one of those scary movies, right? And so, my dad was just like those crazy people that keep getting up even after you think you've killed them, and they keep getting up and they keep getting up. That's what my dad, when I grew up, that's what I thought of him, that he was like the devil because he would just keep getting up. He would just keep coming, and you could keep pushing him away, and you could keep, it's like, and he would never stop, right? Because he's mentally ill, and he was an extremely abusive man. So that's the whole issue, really scary stuff, and people, my mom, she tried to protect herself, and there was no way for her to protect herself. People are absolutely, they do what they do, and you do not deserve that. Abuse is not normal, but they will sometimes say, oh, well, I never did that. See, my dad does not have a clue, what he did to his family, really, because he was in some sort of a psychotic episode, right? He used to walk around the house at night saying, I'm going to kill us all, because he thought that God would be happy if he killed all of his children and himself, in a murder-suicide type thing, right? And so I really never trusted my dad, right? Because my life was always being threatened by him, our lives, right? Not just mine. But I didn't trust him, He would, anytime he was like trying to offer me food, trying to offer me, we went for a walk, and we were living in, my parents moved to Canada. They sold their home for a van and a couple $1,000s, moved us all up to Canada when I was 7 years old, and for one summer. And we were at Stanley Park in Vancouver, we were walking around Stanley Park, and my dad was giving me berries. And my dad was so, I mean, I grew up with this man. I did not trust him, and he was highly abusive. And I thought, he's going to kill us out here in the woods, and he's going to leave our bodies. This is what was going on in my mind, and I was 7 years old. That should not ever happen. You should not ever be in a situation where you're thinking that the person that's with you, who's supposed to love you, who's supposed to be looking after you, supposed to love you, who's supposed to care for you, who's supposed to protect you, is handing you berries, and that they're actually trying to poison you. That was what was in my mind, because my dad was so incredibly, absolutely crazy. Right, he would try to kill himself, and he was absolutely psychotic and crazy. So I thought, I never trusted him, and one time he actually tried to drive me and my sister over a cliff, and my sister was 5 years older, so she went and told my mom, and my mom wouldn't let us go in the car with him anymore without her in the car, because he was absolutely insane, right? And so, people will say, oh, you're just overreacting. Right. This is my dad. Like, he's 88 years old now. He just had surgery. I don't know whether he's alive or dead now, because I'm not really talking to him. And he lives in the same city I do, but I've decided to stop contact with my family. Right. It's my choice. I'm on my healing journey. I can't be part of their dysfunctional world anymore. Right. So I have a very small family anyway. One brother, one sister left out of all these people. Everybody's dead or gone or passed on or killed or committed suicide. Right. So there's only a couple of us left. My dad's 88 and he just had surgery and stuff. But, this whole last year, he's been so toxic toward me that I've actually cut him off. And I'm just so tired of it, right? Enough is enough. And, he's so mentally ill that even this year he was saying stuff like, well, you just have to forgive and forget and move on. He would never, ever really understand what he did to his wife, by hurting her and raping her and beating on her and treating her so horribly her whole life and calling her these horrible names. This is what my mom had to put up. She didn't have to put up with it. She should have got out. That's what I keep saying almost on every show, but I want people to realize that, my mom really, she stayed in this relationship with my dad, this marriage, which I wouldn't call it a marriage. If it was a marriage, it was a marriage in hell with the devil himself. And my mother was my main abuser, so if that just tells you anything about my dad, right, you know what I mean? Like, the guy was absolutely insane. I was concerned that my dad would kill my mother and that we would have to be raised and brought up by my dad. And even though my mom was my main abuser and was hurting me, I would rather have been raised by her than my dad. So if that tells you anything, there you go. So it's absolutely crazy that my dad would sit there and say, oh, I loved my wife, I loved my children. Right. Okay, that's why you did what you did. But that's because he has no concept of what he really did. And he just likes to think that he was just the most wonderful man, the most wonderful father, right? It's really something what happens. And people that know him, today think he's just this sweet, cute old man. Oh, your dad, he's so nice, he's so cute, and he's just so funny. It's like, oh, he's funny, all right. He's funny, you know what I mean? Like, I detailed it in the book just how funny he is, you know what I mean? He's not funny, and what he did to his children and to his wife was so horrific and so incredibly disgusting and disturbing, that it's beyond comprehension of how somebody could treat people like this, but they do, right? And my mother, of course, didn't help the situation and was just as responsible for the abuse of the children because she was an abuser and she was abusing us too. So that's the whole issue. My mom was just as responsible because she was the other person involved in abusing her children, right? So it's absolutely horrible what people will do to their children and do to each other, and then not take responsibility for it, not take accountability. And both of my parents never took responsibility for it, even though they were brought up on abuse charges, right? And so that's the whole issue. It's so sad. And then the rest of the world who looks on and, oh, your mom was so nice, she made cookies. It's like, yeah, you didn't have her foot up your ass every other day. You know what I mean? It's like you didn't have her punching your lights out and calling you a slut and a whore and throwing you around the room and bashing your head in with heavy objects and, treating you so badly and kicking you and punching you. It's like, I used to tell people, you don't live here. That's why you think my mom and dad are great, because you don't live in this home. And they knew the abuse was happening and they turned a blind eye. And so many people will do that, right? Absolutely horrible. We have a minute left. So we'll have to finish the rest of this up on Monday. But you can go to this article at www.mentalhelp.net. Just check out through the articles, Why Do Adults Stay in Abusive Relationships by Catherine Petrocelli. under the abuse topics, right? And you can finish reading through here, and there's all kinds of great info, so please do check this out, right? And if you're in this situation and you're being abused now, you make sure you get some help, no matter what way it is. If you can't cope and you feel like, I just can't do this, you better phone somebody. You better phone a crisis line. You just make sure that you get some help and you reach out. If you can't reach people, you phone a crisis line, right? Because you stay here with us, and you need to stick around, and you need to know that you do count and you do matter, and you do need to stick around and get some help. If you're being abused and you're in this horrible, horrific situation right now, you make sure that you get some help, right? And you stick it out, and you stay here with us, and you talk to somebody, right? Get some help. So don't give up. That's my big message, and never, ever, ever give up. I'm so glad that 4 years ago I decided not to give up. I finally made a commitment to myself, and I said, that's it. I will never, ever, ever, ever plan my suicides again, because I'm gonna win this fight that my parents started when I was born or before I was born. I'm gonna win this fight. I'm gonna stay alive, and I'm gonna have a good life, and it's gonna be such a huge slap in my parents' face, because they really did try to kill us, and they wanted us dead for so many years as these young children. They wanted to see their children dead, because they would say, you never should have been born. I never wanted you in the first place. I wanted you dead, or I should kill you. That's how my mom would talk to me when I was actually from the time I was born until she died, right? So I was 29 years old when she finally passed away, and I didn't have to hear anymore from her toxic mouth. And so, our parents wanted us dead. They taught us, and then they taught us how to kill ourselves. So they were like, hey, we didn't kill you, but you can do the job, right? They set us up to die. So you know what? I'm staying alive, and I'm going to beat this. And that's my thing. I'm like, you do not ever give up, because beyond this bad day and beyond the next bad day and beyond the next bad day is a good day somewhere in there, right? But it won't be if you give up, and it won't be if you don't make a positive step and actually call and talk to somebody and get some help, and when you're ready, begin your healing journey, right? So you have to stick it out, right? It's so important. You do matter to me, and I know so many people are hurting right now. So you make sure that you get some help, right? So we'll talk to you guys again. You can check my show page for the shows on the weekend, and I'll be back on Monday morning, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. I'm also on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio if you want to follow me over there at 9 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That's 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's on blogtalkradiohere.com, www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. And I'm hosting over there as well, so you can catch that show if you'd like. And take care, everybody. Have a great day, and just know that you're in my thoughts. You're in my heart, right? Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.